morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Go Farther series here on the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is another episode in our Go Farther podcast series. Everything we're doing here in the series is talking about how you can do more, be happy, and surprise yourself so that you can go farther. Today's topic is automate decisions. Automate decisions. So I'm going to bust right into this, jump right in, give you reasons why I feel like this topic, automate decisions, is so important to going farther with yourself personally, professionally, mentally, anything that you want to do to help you do more, be happy, and surprise yourself. So why is this important? Then we're going to talk about a couple of specific examples from my endurance training and running and all the things that I do outside of work. Give you some examples from the workplace itself and on how you can automate decisions, and then finally wrap up with a couple of key strategies to help you put this to work right away. So let's jump right in. So what do we mean by automate decisions? I've come across this a couple of different times from different podcasts, different books. And the one place I always fall back to in terms of how I think about automate decisions is from a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, a book that came out, I think maybe about 7-8 years ago. Easy to find, great read. And one of the things that Greg McKeown talks about in the book is to make one decision to save 1,000. Make one decision to save 1,000. And that's where this concept of automate decisions comes in. So when we talk about automating decisions, what I want to do for myself and what I think is a good strategy for a lot of us is to simply look at how do we move away from having to make more and more decisions every single day or every week around the work that we're going to do, or the training or the workouts or the exercise routine that we want to do. And so I find this particularly important because I know for myself, when I have a heavy training schedule ahead for a race that I might be doing, sometimes I just, like all humans, right? We just lack willpower. A lot of times we hear like, oh, you got to have really strong motivation. You got to have really good willpower. And I don't really know if willpower is enough actually to help you get out and do, an exercise regimen that you might want to do. Motivation is not enough. I've said before, and when I tell some people that ask me about like, how do you stay motivated? And what I say is like, motivation is for suckers, because motivation is something that doesn't always happen. You don't always feel motivated to go out and do a run, for example. This weekend was the first rainy day we've had in like 4 to 6 weeks, and probably the last rainy day we're going to have for about 6 months here in the Sacramento Valley. And it was the one day I had planned to go out to the trail, out in a little bit in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, and do a long trail run as part of my training. And I was looking at the weather, and I'm like, man, this is the one day it's going to be cold and rainy. We had this weird cold front that came in the middle of beginning of May, which is really unusual. So much so that we even got a foot of snow up in the high Sierras in the ski resort. So the ski resorts are still open. And I'm looking at the weather and thinking to myself, like, are you serious? Like the one day I want to get out to the trail, I'm just going to be soaking wet the entire time. So I'm not motivated to get up at 5 in the morning and drive out to the hills and be wet for 4 hours when I'm running 17 miles. And so instead, what we've got to do is think about like, how do we just automate this decision? The other reason I think this can be really kind of like frustrating or can be a battle for ourselves is that there's just a lot of distractions. There's a lot of different things that can come up that can pull you away from those things that you might plan to do. And thirdly, I think there's this decision fatigue. Decision fatigue is real. This idea of Tim Ferriss talks about decision points. So every time we make decisions in a day, there's a point system in a way that we have with our minds that every decision kind of takes away from the total number of points we might have in a day. So whether it's, the clothes you're going to wear that day or the food you're going to eat, those are small decisions, but yet they eat away at our decision points. And then later on in the day at work, you might have very large decisions to make. It might be around hiring somebody or product launches that you want to do, or how to think about pricing for that next customer. And you've got to negotiate that contract. And that's a lot of big decisions that are coming in. Maybe you've got to decide whether or not you're going to let somebody go on the team. And those are lots of decision points. And so the more that we can automate decisions, then the fewer decision points that we're using up every single day. And below all of this, I think ultimately you got these frustrations around like this lack of willpower sometimes, or we've got lots of distractions, or we know that this decision fatigue is real. I think for me, sometimes I ask myself, like, how badly do I want this thing that I'm working on? Like, how badly do I really want to do this race coming up in July? Or how badly, do I really want this business to go? Like, can I just kind of settle for where I'm at? And that's where it's important to leverage this concept here and go farther to automate your decisions. Because number one, that will help us stay more disciplined. Discipline overrides motivation every single day for me. Like if I know I have to do a thing or that I've automated a decision, I've already decided to work out, I've already decided that I'm going out in that trail run, then I don't have to worry about motivating myself. I just get up and go because that's what I've already decided. It also allows me to stick to my plan. If I have a training schedule laid out for myself for this week and how many miles I want to do, well, if I'm planning to do 50 total miles in the week, and this trail run is going to be 15 or 16 or 17 miles of that 50, I can't just skip the training run because then a huge chunk of those miles that I promised myself that are part of my training plan are just going to happen. And the other part about automating decisions is it allows us to make a little bit of progress step by step. One of the books that I've read before that was really impactful, a book that was really impactful for me in my writing, writing books or writing, staying consistent with my writing is by Annie Lamont. She's an author and she wrote a book called Bird by Bird. And the title of the book, Bird by Bird, came from a story that she told that I think it was her brother was supposed to do this report when he was in grade school on birds. And it was something like a certain number of birds were supposed to be part of this report. And it was the night before this report was due. And he asked his dad, like, how am I going to do this report with all these birds? And his dad turned to him and said, bird by bird, just bird by bird. And so I've always remembered that when I'm doing my writing or when I'm doing my training or whenever I'm thinking about my day ahead and all of the things I might have stacked up, the meetings I might have, or the sales calls I'm going to have, or the client calls I'm going to have. And I'm like, wow, I got a really busy day ahead, or a really busy week, or a really busy training block ahead. How am I going to manage all this? And I always remember this part of the story of the book of bird by bird, just one by one, workout by workout, meeting by meeting, call by call, client by client. And by automating decisions, it allows us to go one thing to the next and not have to worry about what am I going to do next. You just do that next thing. And ultimately, what this, I think for me, is that the automation of decisions and staying disciplined, sticking to the plan, going bird by bird is what has enabled me in certain ways to go farther. It allows me to kind of transform and become a new person or to break through a new distance or to do that next race, which is what I think all of us really want. Let's jump into a couple of examples of how I've automated decisions in my endurance training. So, got a few examples here, and the first thing that popped to mind when I was thinking about this idea of automating decisions was many years ago. I think it was 2013. I was training for my third Ironman triathlon, and I had found this Ironman triathlon down in Melbourne, Australia. And Australia's always been a place I wanted to go. And it was a course that looked really interesting, really fast because it wasn't like super hilly. And I thought like this would be a great race to do. So fortunately, I was able to get a spot in the race. And the race itself was in March of the year of 2013. Because if you think about northern southern hemisphere, the seasons are opposite, of course. And so March down there is the end of the summer. And so that's a really good time to do a race. It's starting to cool off a little bit, not too hot, but the weather's still really good. But here in the northern hemisphere, March is the end of winter. And even though I live in Northern California where the weather is, it's not Michigan or Minnesota or Maine where we're getting dumped on in snow, it definitely gets cold. It definitely gets rainy. A lot of the rain is what, becomes snow packed up in the mountains. And living in the Sacramento Valley now for 15 plus years, I've always felt that 45 degrees and rainy in Sacramento feels colder than 20 degrees and snowy in New Jersey, where I grew up. So signing up for a race in March meant I was going to be training through the winter months and training for triathlon. Much of that training is on the bike. You're spending 3 to 4 days a week doing bike training, cycling. And some of those bike rides are an hour, hour and a half, so they're shorter. But then there's always at least one long ride where you're going to be going 4, 5, 6 hours on the bike to try to get in, anywhere from 70 to even as much as 100 miles on the bike ride just as part of your training in a single day. And I remember my parents were visiting me one year, and I can't remember if it was over, it might have been around Christmas or January. And I remember, gearing up in the early morning to go out for a bike ride, and everybody was up having coffee, and it was out. I looked outside; it was cold, it was rainy. I was taking plastic bags and like little plastic bags you might get from the grocery store to fill fruit in. And I'm putting them over my feet before I put my socks on, so my feet would try to keep my feet dry because you're going to be out there in the rain for 6 hours. And I remember turning to my parents and just saying, I am not looking forward to this. But it was part of the training, right? And I sort of like automated that decision and say, well, today is the long bike ride, and today I'm going to go do this. And even though my parents are visiting, and even though it's cold and rainy, and even though I don't want to do this, I still went out there and did the ride. And for some reason, that particular training day is always kind of stuck in my mind. Another example is another race I did that was also Southern Hemisphere, was a race called the Tarawera 100, which is down in New Zealand. It's in a town called Rotorua on the northern island of New Zealand. And that race was an ultra marathon, 100-mile ultra marathon. And that race is end of January. So again, training through the winter months here, running in the rain, I don't mind quite as much as cycling in the rain, but it's still cold, it's still rainy, and all of those things. And by then, Tarawera, I think it was January 2020, I was doing this race. So it was just before COVID. And I remember thinking about that training block, that last like big training block, November, December into January, when really ramping up miles, really ramping up fitness. And those obviously coincide with the holidays. So I've got Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, lots of family time, friends coming over. And I remember in early November, at that point, I was looking ahead to the training, and I said to myself, okay, from here to the race, no more alcohol. Now, I'm not a huge drinker. I certainly used to drink a lot more in my college days and in my early 20s. But, I still have a couple beers here and there, or, a glass of wine with dinner. But, I was looking at the training and said, like, I want to be disciplined. And so how do I stay disciplined on making sure that I'm always fresh in the morning? I'm not logging extra calories that are going to hurt me. I was following a paleo diet, so like really low carbs, high protein, high fat as energy store. And so just basically saying to myself, like, look, no alcohol from now until the race. And that was hard because, Thanksgiving, we happened to have 4 or 5 families over to our house for a friend's Thanksgiving. I think it was the week before, week after, or after Thanksgiving. And these are all like super close friends that my wife and I both know from our master's degree in San Francisco, and just like really fun festivities there at the house. And that was tough, right? You have like bottles of wine and people having beers. And I was like, man, that would probably be great to have a glass of wine with turkey. But I told myself, like, no alcohol. And the same with Christmas, the same with New Year's. And I basically just said, look, no alcohol. And just automated that decision so that I can make that one decision in early November, so that every time I was going to be in a place where alcohol was served, I could basically say, look, I don't have to make a decision today because I've already made that decision in early November. So Christmas parties, New Year's Eve, the Thanksgiving stuff, I was like, nope, I already made my decision. I don't have to decide today if I'm going to have a glass of wine, because I decided back in early November I wasn't going to have any alcohol. Another example of this was during COVID. So I had the race in January 2020, and then obviously COVID, we all remember quite well. And when everything first shut down in, I guess it would have been early March, schools are closing, everything, we're going into what everyone thought was like a 2-week shutdown. It was kind of like this weird time, of course, like understatement. And I remember thinking, or the first couple of weekends of shutdown, like Friday night, Saturday night, just as a way to kind of like relieve stress, or this perception of stress release. My wife and I would open up a bottle of wine, or I'd have, get a couple of beers. We'd have dinner and I'd have a beer or two. We'd sit outside. We'd, try to like figure out how we're going to pass the time. And I remember, even though I wasn't drinking a lot, I just remember the following mornings kind of waking up feeling groggy, from 2 beers or feeling a little groggy from 2 glasses of wine. And it didn't feel great. It didn't feel great to wake up groggy. And then, having to figure out ways to entertain my son, who at the time was in third grade. And so, still self-sufficient, but, he's the only child and there's just three of us. And this is when everyone was like locked out. Like you didn't even like go outside and play with friends because everybody's worried about transmitting COVID. And I just remember a couple of mornings feeling like I didn't feel like I wanted to do anything with him. Like, he wanted to play a game. And I was like, okay, fine. And I just wasn't myself. And so I did the same. There's two decisions that I made during those first early couple of weeks of COVID. One was, again, I made the no alcohol decision. I just said, look, I don't know how long this shutdown is going to go, but for however long it goes, until it seems like we're kind of out of this thing, I'm just not going to have any alcohol because I just didn't want to feel that grogginess. I didn't want to feel that fuzziness in my brain. And the second thing I decided to do was to exercise every day. I just said, look, one of the things I can do is, for stress relief more than anything, even if it's 15 or 20 minutes in the garage where I'm doing a workout of some kind, just to sweat a little bit, get the endorphins flowing, get some exercise, sleep a little bit better. I'm just going to exercise every single day. And I'd been doing really well with that during COVID. And it was probably about a month into the shutdown. And there was a Friday. It was just like got up early, super busy day at work, trying to get everything in, helping my son out with his homeschooling, balancing time between me watching my son, my wife spending time with him while she was trying to do her work. I was trying to do my work. It was one of those Fridays where things just got really late. And it was around 10:30 at night. I was laying in bed and I had not exercised that day. And I remember laying there thinking to myself, like, I haven't exercised today. And so I got and I just decided, I was like, look, I said I was going to exercise every day. So I got up, I went to the garage, I did like a 20-minute workout, showered up, and then went back to bed. And I was just like, because I told myself I committed, like I said I was going to exercise every day. I haven't exercised today. I need to go do that. So these are just like examples of automating these decisions that have enabled me to kind of like stay consistent. It's going back to that comment or that statement from Greg McKeown's book Essentialism, like one decision to save 1,000. And that's really what kind of like when it comes into thinking about my training and I think about the ultra marathons or I think about all the runs I need to do, like this weekend run when it was cold and rainy and I didn't feel like going out there. I had made that plan. I told myself on Saturday, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go out to Auburn, I'm going to do that run is what allowed me to get the miles in. And so those are the things that we need to do on the training side in order to get, the progress done that we want to make. The other cool thing I will say about COVID, doing the exercise every day, even though there were small workouts, whether it was a short run or that garage workout, there were some runs that went a little bit farther. And when I was a few weeks away from my birthday, which was at the end of May, maybe about 2 or 3 weeks away from my birthday, because I had just at least stayed in some kind of decent shape. It was my birthday. It was going to be my 46th birthday at the time. And I remember telling myself, I'm going to run a 46K. I'm going to run 46 kilometers on my 46th birthday. So it's just over 26 miles. I think it's like comes to 28 miles. So technically an ultra marathon. And because I had automated that decision and because I had avoided alcohol, because I had done a little bit of exercise every day, it enabled me to have just enough of a ramp up period where I could go out and comfortably run 46 kilometers. Now it was slow and it was kind of a slog in some places, but I got it done. And I remember that feeling of accomplishment when I got up early on my birthday, went out, knocked out 46 kilometers, got home by 11 o'clock in the morning and feeling like, okay, on this birthday in the middle of COVID, I had done something really important to myself. I had stuck to who I am as a person, even though all of the race calendars were shut down, even though I couldn't go out and do an ultra. I was supposed to do Western States that year. It got pushed in the following year because the race was canceled. I still did something really important for myself, which is I still ran an ultra marathon, even though COVID prevented us, for every runner, from doing any kind of big race. All right, so there's some examples from the training world, the ultra world, in terms of automating decisions to help me do more, be happy, and surprise myself, to help me go farther. Let's jump into a couple of work examples of how you can automate decisions to help you and your business go farther. Before I do that, I want to ask you, As always, if you have not yet followed the show, please follow the show. Please leave a review and please get the word out. Every week we do check the downloads, we check the number of people who listen, we check, we look at those metrics. And the reason we look at those metrics is because we want to know that the impact that we're making here on this podcast is real. It's important to me to know that if I'm investing this time and getting this word out, that the word is getting out to as many people as possible, people that might want to hear this message, people that might benefit from this. And so if you've got a friend, a co-founder, partner, anybody that you feel like could benefit from this series or the other podcasts that we've done over the years, please do send them a text, share the show, send an email and say, hey, check out this episode, check out this show, follow the show, listen to a few episodes. I know that there's always heavy competition for people's podcast playlists, especially now with so many podcasts out there. But I know for me, as I listen to different podcasts, I go through ebbs and flows where I might listen to a podcast really consistently for 6, 7, 8 months, maybe longer. And then it kind of gets a little stale and I'm looking for something new. Or there's certain days where I'm like, I usually listen to this podcast when I'm listening to the dog walk, but I'm not feeling that podcast today. I'm looking for something new. And this is a chance for you to share this so that can pop up in their show playlist and maybe say to themselves, like, hey, I'm going to give this show, the Startup Selling Show and this podcast series on Go Farther. I'm going to give this a shot today. And the only way they're going to know about that, the only way your friend, co-founder, your partner, your spouse, whoever is going to know about the show is if you share it. So word of mouth is the best way still to get podcasts out to more people. And by word of mouth, that means your mouth or your text or your email. So please, please, please take a moment, share this episode, leave us a review, and please follow the show if you're not already doing it. Okay, so let's talk about how to automate decisions. Work examples. I'm going to share some of my personal examples with my business and myself, as well as examples of what we do with our clients in our sales qualia, sales coaching, startup selling coaching program. And as I say every single episode, whatever I'm sharing here, it doesn't make me the expert in any of these things. These are just strategies, systems, skills that I've learned over time. I oftentimes reference other people like Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism, or Tim Ferriss show, or other people I listen to, because those ideas that I am sharing with you are often the ones that either I have personally adopted for myself or ones that I've listened to and then adapted them to my situation. And that's the same that I want to do with you. If you hear something and you're like, hey, I can do exactly that thing, adopt it and use it, awesome. If there's something you hear, you're like, okay, I like the idea of that, but I want to change it a little bit and adapt it, do that as well. Again, it's just something that I want to share with you that has worked for me across my training, across my work life, to help me do some things that help me do more, be happy, and surprise myself. So, okay, let's talk about work examples. So the first example that comes to mind for me when I automate decisions is doing this podcast or any content that I am producing on behalf of the company, because producing content is really, really difficult some days. Like, just like this concept that motivation is for suckers, there are certain days, right? Many days where I sit down and I think like, am I really motivated to write right now? Am I really motivated to sit down and do a podcast? And some days there are. Like, I love doing this podcast and I love coming up with these episodes. But 4 a.m. on Monday when the alarm goes off, like, that's early. If you usually had a busy weekend doing family stuff or soccer or even putting in some work hours, and it's like, I automate that decision to get up at 4 o'clock every day, Monday through Friday, and that's the first automation of decision that I'm doing. But then knowing, like, okay, Monday morning is the morning when I'm going to sketch out the content for the next episode, and then I'm going to record this episode. And so blocking out that time and just saying, like, this is the time I'm going to do this before I check email, before I work on projects, before I work on anything else related to the work. I've just automated this, and it does allow me to get into a flow. I had the same when I was writing my third book, a book I published a couple of years ago called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, which, by the way, you're welcome to grab a copy of that book totally for free. If you go to salesqualia, qualia.com/book, you can download a full complete copy of that book. And I was the first draft of the book that was done and submitted, and it came back from the publisher, and I was just completely miserable with the way that it came out. I was like, this is dog crap. Like, this is not the way I wanted this book to look. It's not the way I wanted it to be structured. It's not the way I wanted it to be written. Just really, really unhappy with the first draft of the book. Of course, even though I was responsible for it. And so I looked at it and I was like, I got to rewrite this whole thing. I had spent like months writing this first draft. And when it came back from the publisher, it's like, this is just not going to do. And so I had to rewrite the whole book starting from the beginning. And one of the ways I did that was by automating this decision to go to a local Phil's Coffee in downtown Davis. It opens up at 6 a.m. And I basically told my wife, I'm like, look, a couple days a week, I would block out this time on my calendar. And I told her, like, I am going to go to Phil's Coffee and I got to get an hour to 90 minutes of writing in at least 2 to 3 days a week. I just automated that decision. And what that decision automation allowed me to do is that it does actually get you into the flow. If I know my routine is get up, go to Phil's Coffee, order a large coffee on the way using the mobile app so that when I show up, it's ready to go and I sit down and I just start to write in that environment, then it allows me to get the work that needs to be done. So this idea of just like blocking out the time and sticking to a routine, which is find your routine, which is a whole episode we did just a little while ago, is so, so important because it allows me to just kick into gear to do the thing that I know is really important. A second example of how to automate decisions. This is something I do myself with the business, but also something that we share with clients all the time. And this is something I do for a handful of clients where they have a more embedded consulting kind of engagement with us. And that's doing daily stand-ups, daily sales stand-ups. And so this idea of automating the decision around the stand-up is not like, well, we should check in every once in a while with the sales team throughout the course of the day, or I should, even if I'm a single person founder and I've got 2 or 3 people that are helping me out on sales. It's like, it's easy to kind of skip the daily stand-up and say, well, I'll just have people check in on Slack. Instead, like doing the daily stand-up and putting it on the calendar and saying like every day on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're going to do a daily stand-up. Every Thursday, we're going to do a 1 hour pipeline call. Every Friday, we're going to do a weekly planning call for the week ahead. This is something I do with one of my clients. I run stand-ups Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 15-minute stand-ups. What did you work on yesterday? What are you working on today? What are your blockers? Every Thursday, we do a pipeline review where everybody brings their top deals to work on as a group. Every Friday, we do a weekly planning call to talk about what are the biggest 3 deals you're going to work on next week. And what are the next 3 things you're going to do that are in your control? And this is on the counter, is no excuses. Everybody has to show up, including me. And that is an automation of decision because it requires people to show up and be ready to go. It requires people to show up and be ready to plan about the day, about the week, to know what their top 3 deals are and where they're feeling stuck. And so sticking to that plan is part of finding a routine and part of scheduling everything, but it's also automating the decision to do the stand up every single day. So people know that this is important. It's part of the culture and it's part of the way to help them advance their business and help them advance the deals that we're working on. A third work example of automating decision is prospecting. I've talked about this before in other podcasts. People are like, prospecting. I don't want to do my prospecting. How do I get motivated to do prospecting? Well, you don't get motivated. You just automate the decision. Like number one is you put in the time block, and I usually recommend at least 2 90-minute time blocks per week, or 3 60-minute time blocks. That's minimum. Put those in your calendar, block out that time like it's a meeting, tell the rest of your team, this is when I do my prospecting. Do not schedule another meeting. If you're on a call with a prospective client, they say, can you meet at Tuesday at 2 o'clock? And that's your block of prospecting time. Ask them if there are alternative times. Well, I've already got a commitment to Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Can you do 1 o'clock? Can you do 4 o'clock? What about Wednesday? Likely your client or that prospect will have another time available. Just because the first time they ask for is Tuesday at 2 o'clock doesn't mean that you have to take that time. Occasionally, yes, you might have to make an exception. However, the rule is Tuesday, 2 o'clock is my prospecting time. You just automate that decision. And then within that prospecting time, the other thing to automate is to say, look, I'm going to do my 20, meaning I'm going to do my 20 touches, my 20 unique outreaches on LinkedIn, email, phone calls, whatever those 20 are. I'm going to do my 20. You just automate that in that 90-minute block. I'm going to do at least 20 touches. So that means if 90 minutes is up and I've only done 18, you got to do two more. If you're only 60 minutes in, you've done your 20, guess what? Go for another five, another 10 in the last 30 minutes that are left. So stick to it. Don't stop and always stick to that plan, always stick to that routine, always stick to that decision you already made throughout the course of the week, before the week started, before the month started. Every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, that's one of my prospecting block times. That's something that will help you always fill the funnel. You do those 20 touches, I guarantee you're going to find one or two or three new sales opportunities you can add to your pipeline, which is what you need to do. It's very practical, it's very tactical. It's a kind of skill that you need to build, and it's the kind of system you need to implement. And it all comes down to automating that decision that I am going to do this time block of prospecting at this time. A couple other examples from work are things like, again, these are like very specific sales related strategies and systems and skills. But one of them is before you do a big demo to a group, a big prospect, is you always do what I call, or what my friend Peter Cohen calls, a situation slide. A situation slide is a slide that you build that summarizes all of what you've learned in customer discovery and sales qualification, your lead qualification, that summarizes the use cases. It summarizes the business case that this prospect has. And the reason I call this automating a decision is that it's easy to get lazy. It's easy to get unmotivated to say, well, I'm just going to I already know what's going on, and they're highly motivated as buyers. And I don't have to do this situation slide. And what I tell my clients is no, every single time you're doing a big demo, you must present a situation slide. You have to do it. It's part of your sales process. Just like part of my exercise or my training process is doing a long trail run on Saturday mornings. Even though I may not want to do it, and even though it's easy to sort of get a little bit lazy, you must do it no matter what. Another example of a sales process where you just automate that decision is booking a meeting from a meeting. We call that BAM-FAM, BAM-FAM, book a meeting from a meeting. Automate the decision to always book a meeting from a meeting. It's easy to get lazy at the end of a call when you have a highly motivated prospect that says, oh, yeah, we'll get back to you. You've got to automate that process, or automate the decision, so to speak, to say, nope, let's go ahead and get something on the calendar right now. So these are just ways to automate so you don't have to worry about chasing after leads. You don't have to worry about deciding when you're going to do your prospecting. You don't have to worry about when you're going to do that next stand up or that pipeline review. You're just basically automating that this is my schedule, this is my calendar, this is when I'm going to do certain things. And by doing those things, it overrides any lack of motivation because it's in the calendar, it's already scheduled. You're just letting that go for you, and you're following that schedule that you already made for yourself. All right, so those are examples from training. Those are examples from work. Let's talk about 5 specific strategies. I've already started giving you some tips here, but let's get through 5 specific strategies where you can automate decisions to help you do more, be happy, and surprise yourself so you can go farther. Number 1 is schedule everything. This is an entire episode that I did recently in this Go Farther podcast series, which is schedule everything. It just basically says to me, you just think once, so you don't have to think about it later. Decision fatigue is real. Decision points are real. And so the more that you can just think once, do your planning, get it scheduled, then you're just following the plan. You're just following the schedule. When I wake up on Monday morning, I'm in the calendar, it says I'm going to do the Go Farther podcast series. Cool. I just get up and I do it. And then over time, your brain will start to follow that flow. They'll follow the routine. It will say, at this time, I'm doing this podcast, or I'm doing my prospecting, or I'm doing my stand-ups. Then your brain will kick in and just know that these are the things that you're doing. So you don't have to worry about making decisions when you're going to do the next stand-up, or when you're going to find time to do your prospecting. Part of this too, for me, as part of automating decisions, is whenever I'm traveling to the same place over and over, I typically just stay at the exact same hotel. And so the reason this is important for me, especially on the personal level, is when I'm doing my training, if I'm doing my race training, right now I have a client down in Las Vegas, and regularly every couple of weeks I go down there and I do what's called a client day, which means I get there and we do an entire day together where I'm working on specific parts of the sales process. I'm looking at their pipeline. We're doing pipeline reviews. I'm coaching them from a management standpoint. I'm working with their teams and helping them with sales training. It's just a super intense one day before I go down there. And so I have found a hotel that is 1 mile away from the office where they work. And it's a hotel that I had to kind of scour and find. It's away from the Las Vegas Strip. It's a place that has a really good gym. Like it's a Hilton property. It's called True by Hilton. It's got a really good hotel gym with some dumbbells. It's got a box, so I can do box jumps if I want. It's a nice space. It's very friendly staff. And it's just like automating that decision that when I go to Las Vegas, that's the hotel I stay at. Now, sometimes the rates might fluctuate. It's a little more expensive one time and a little less expensive the other. But this way, I just like going there. That's where I stay the night before. I can get up, I can do my exercise, I can do my training, go to breakfast, and then go spend that day with the client. And I'll have to think about where and when am I going to do my exercise because it's already there. It's in that gym. I don't have to think about which hotel I'm going to stay at. I just book the flight, book that hotel, and it reduces the decision fatigue that I have. Okay. So just schedule everything, think once. It allows you to automate your decisions. Number two strategy is prepare ahead. Prepare ahead. So what do I mean by preparing ahead? Part of that routine, as part of that, the work that you're doing, preparing ahead is making it easy to do the next thing. So for example, if I know that I'm going to be doing that long trail run on Saturday morning and I'm going to be getting up early, one of the things I do is I get all my gear laid out. This is not something you haven't heard before. I mean, people talk about this all the time. If you're doing exercise, then the best thing you can do is get your clothes laid out, get your water ready so that you have no excuses, no delays, no procrastination. And so it works really, really well for me. When I get my gear bag together, I get all my water, all my nutrition, all my food, all my shoes, everything I'm going to need is ready to go, sitting in my front room by the front door, so that when it's 5 o'clock in the morning and I've got to get up, I got to get changed, I can just pick up my stuff, grab my things out of the fridge, and just get in the car and go. And just automates for me the ability to take advantage of that training that block that I've already scheduled out. It gets me there on time. It gets me done on time. It gets me home on time so I can do the other things. So it just that idea of preparing ahead is part of automating decisions because then you don't have to think about anything. You just get up and you go. Number three strategies, communicate. Communicate those decisions that you already made with the people around you. So I mentioned when I was training for the TerraWare 100, and I said, look, I'm not going to drink any alcohol between now and the race. It was important for me to communicate that to my wife and just say, look, I know there's going to be opportunities for me to have a glass of wine or a beer. Just don't even bother offering it to me. And that was important because I didn't want to have to remake the decision. And I told her this, I'm like, I'll be tempted. Of course, I'm going to want a glass of wine with turkey dinner. Of course, I'm going to want to have a beer on New Year's Eve. That's something that it would be natural, right? It's like, yeah, of course, let's have a beer and celebrate. And so I don't even want to have to make that decision. So just, do me a favor. I know other people might offer to me and I've got to say no to them. But if there's just one fewer people, one less person that I have to say no to, it just helps it make it easier for me. The other example of that when I was as a way to communicate is I told my wife in January of this year, I set a personal goal for myself in January where I wanted to do 50 workouts in 31 days. That included, garage workout, meant going for a run or using rowing machine or swimming or going to jujitsu, lots of different ways I could do a workout. But I told myself I was going to do 50 workouts in January. And I also communicated that to my wife so that she knew that was something that was really important to me. So that way, as I was getting that time on my calendar to do a jiu-jitsu class or to go to the local pool and get a swim in, she knew that that was something that was really important to me. And that allowed her and I to adjust our schedules. And it also allowed me to adjust my training schedule if I needed to, if she told me, like, I've got this really important meeting at work. So can you take Benjamin to school? I've got to get up and get to campus, which means that I might not be able to do that swim in the morning that I was expecting to do. So it just that idea of communicating makes it easier to automate your decisions because then the other people around you are helping you to stick to those decisions that you've already made for yourself. Strategy number three, accountability. Ask your team, talk to your team, hold them accountable. Like, hey, did you do your 20 touches? When are you doing that prospecting time? the more you hold other people accountable or you ask people to hold you accountable, the easier it is to automate those decisions because it will force you to stick to those decisions if you know you're going to get asked about that, or if your team knows you're going to be asking about them. And if they say, oh, I didn't get to it, then ask them why not. Be rigid, be a little bit rigid, hold them accountable, hold their feet to the fire. Say, look, you said you were going to do those 20 touches. You said your prospecting time was at 2:00. What prevented you from getting those 20 in? Because it will force them to either ask themselves or tell you what prevented them from doing that prospecting time so that you can work with them. And getting other people to hold you accountable will force you to stick to those decisions because you don't want to have to tell somebody like, oh, I didn't do my 20 prospecting or I didn't do my trail run because it was rainy. The accountability, especially across peers, is a really, really strong way for you to stick to those decisions that you've automated. The last strategy, number 5, is to log your progress and reflect back. One of the things that's like a really simple thing for me on my training is I use Strava as a way to track my training. And one of the really cool things I love about their mobile app is that it tracks your progress and it shows you a graph over time of how many miles you've walked or how many miles you've run or how many yards you've swam. And so I really love every single time I do a run, I love seeing that little graph tick up for the week. And then over multiple weeks, I love seeing that graph tick up as I'm building up mileage. And it just gives me that sense of satisfaction that making progress. I can see all that area underneath the graph of the chart that's showing me how many miles I've run and how many miles I've run in that month or how many miles I've run in a year. I think it's really important to help reinforce those decisions that we've made to do the work, to put the time in the calendar to do the runs, to go out and do that trail run when it's rainy, so that we can look back on those and say, wow, this is why I've automated this decision. So I can feel the sense of accomplishment. I can feel the joy of knowing that I'm doing hard things and I'm making progress. So those are my 5 strategies. Number 1, schedule everything so you only have to think once. Number 2, prepare ahead to make it easy to fall in line with the decisions that you've made. Number 3, communicate with the people around you. Tell them the decisions that you've made so they can, number 4, hold you accountable to those decisions. And then number 5, make sure you're logging your progress, reflecting back on that progress that you've made. So that's this week's episode on automate decisions to help you do more, be happy, and surprise yourself. Go farther.